now, the world's worst child killer walks completely free. Pedro López confessed to murdering over 300 children across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru between 1969 and 1980. Today, he lives unmonitored somewhere in South America, possibly still killing, while authorities pretend he doesn't exist to avoid admitting their catastrophic failure. He specifically targeted indigenous girls at busy markets, knowing their disappearances would be ignored by racist authorities who viewed them as disposable. López was released after just 14 years in Ecuador, receiving approximately 20 days imprisonment for each murdered child he confessed to killing. Multiple psychiatrists unanimously declared López would kill again immediately upon release, calling him irredeemably dangerous and completely lacking any human empathy whatsoever. Ecuador freed him anyway in 1994, later releasing him completely in 1998, with no supervision, monitoring, or even basic tracking. The 300 confirmed victims represent only those bodies found. López himself claimed the real number exceeded 350 children. Each country refused to coordinate investigations with the others, allowing López to exploit jurisdictional blindness and cross borders freely after every killing spree. Indigenous communities reported dozens of missing girls for years. Police dismissed every report as runaways, despite clear patterns of predatory behavior. López would befriend young girls at markets during daylight, gaining trust before leading them away to isolated locations where he'd strangle them. He called killing his divine mission from God, showing zero remorse and describing murder as more addictive and pleasurable than any drug. Right now, families of 300 victims live knowing their daughter's killer walks free somewhere, possibly selecting his next innocent victim. The youngest confirmed victim was just 8 years old. López preferred girls between 8 and 12, specifically choosing the most vulnerable targets. Government officials in all 3 countries actively suppressed the true death toll to avoid international embarrassment and accountability for their systemic failures. López grew up in extreme poverty and violence, sexually assaulted repeatedly in prison as a teenager, creating the perfect storm of trauma. This doesn't excuse mass murder. It explains how systems failed at every level, from childhood protection to criminal justice to victim advocacy. He developed his killing method through practice, learning to approach girls when mothers were distracted by haggling with vendors at busy markets. López would promise food, money, or small gifts, exploiting poverty and hunger to lure children who hadn't eaten in days. Once isolated, he'd strangle victims slowly while watching their eyes, later describing this moment as his greatest pleasure and ultimate life purpose. Bodies were often buried in shallow graves near markets, discovered only when rain or animals exposed remains months or years after murders. López kept detailed mental records of every victim, able to lead police to specific graves and describe each girl's final moments with disturbing accuracy. He viewed himself as doing girls a favor, claiming he saved them from future suffering by sending them to heaven while still innocent. This delusional justification never wavered. Even during psychiatric evaluations, López insisted he was chosen by God to deliver innocent souls from corruption. Police only caught López when an Ambato market flood exposed multiple bodies, finally forcing authorities to acknowledge what communities had reported for years. Indigenous leaders had warned authorities repeatedly about a serial predator. Every warning was dismissed as superstition or exaggeration by racist officials. Even with bodies discovered, police initially refused to connect the cases, claiming the deaths were unrelated despite identical strangulation marks and victim profiles. Only when 4 girls disappeared from the same market in 1 week did authorities finally act, setting up surveillance that caught Lopez attempting another abduction. During interrogation, Lopez confessed calmly and completely, leading investigators to grave sites across 3 countries while showing no emotional response to victims' photographs. He provided such detailed information that investigators couldn't process all the sites, eventually stopping grave excavations due to overwhelming numbers and limited resources. Prosecutors in Colombia couldn't charge Lopez because their maximum sentence was only 16 years, making prosecution pointless given his crime scale and danger level. Ecuador took custody and convicted Lopez of just 110 murders, the maximum their legal system allowed despite 300 confirmed victims existing. The judge who sentenced Lopez to 16 years literally apologized in court, stating the law prevented justice while Lopez smiled throughout the entire proceeding. Prison psychiatrists documented Lopez's complete lack of rehabilitation potential, noting he spent sessions describing his murders in loving detail with obvious pleasure and nostalgia. He received special protection in prison after inmates discovered his crimes, requiring solitary confinement that inadvertently gave him peaceful conditions better than general population. Lopez studied law books in prison, learning exactly when he'd be released and preparing for freedom while showing guards photos of children from magazines. In 1994, Ecuador declared Lopez rehabilitated despite every psychiatric evaluation stating the opposite, releasing him to Colombia, which immediately deported him back. The bureaucratic ping-pong continued for years, with no country wanting responsibility, while Lopez remained free to move throughout South America, completely unmonitored. Ecuador finally released him permanently in 1998 at night, without notifying victims' families or establishing any monitoring system to track his movements. Within hours of release, Lopez disappeared completely. No government agency in any country knows or admits to knowing his current location or status. In 2002, Lopez was linked to a fresh murder in Colombia. Authorities issued an arrest warrant, but made no genuine effort to locate him. Some officials claim Lopez died years ago, but provide no death certificate, no body, and no evidence beyond wishful thinking and bureaucratic convenience. Others admit he's probably alive and killing, but say tracking him would require resources and inter-country cooperation that simply doesn't exist for indigenous victims. Interpol added Lopez to their wanted list, but classifies him as low priority, since his victims were poor indigenous girls from developing nations. Today, Lopez would be 76 years old, still capable of killing children if his health permits, living completely free from any supervision or monitoring. Recent unverified sightings place him in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, suggesting he continues traveling the same circuit where he murdered 300 children. Markets across South America still report missing indigenous girls in patterns eerily similar to Lopez's known methods from the 1970s and 80s. No government investigates these disappearances seriously. The same systemic racism and poverty that enabled Lopez's original killing spree remains completely unchanged today. Mothers at markets still watch their daughters constantly, knowing a confirmed child killer walks free while authorities refuse to acknowledge he exists. Some families hire private investigators with their meager savings, desperately seeking answers about missing daughters that police won't even document as crimes. Lopez proved that in South America, you can murder 300 indigenous children and serve just 14 years if the system considered your victims worthless. This wasn't justice failing. This was justice working exactly as designed, protecting powerful institutions while sacrificing the most vulnerable citizens. Every official who released Lopez knew he'd kill again. They calculated that indigenous deaths mattered less than international embarrassment from keeping him imprisoned. Right now, at this very moment, Lopez could be standing in any market, watching children selecting his next victim while authorities pretend he's dead. No alarm systems exist. No wanted posters hang in markets. No warnings reach vulnerable communities because acknowledging Lopez means admitting continued governmental failure. Parents in poor communities can't afford to keep children from working in markets, forced to risk their daughters' lives for survival money. The monster of the Andes earned his name by turning the mountain trade routes into killing fields, exploiting the same poverty that created him. Some investigators believe Lopez has trained successors, teaching younger predators his methods before age makes him unable to kill personally anymore. Child disappearances in Lopez's former hunting grounds have increased dramatically in recent years, suggesting either his return or successful recruitment of disciples. No international task force exists. No resources are allocated. No one with power cares enough about poor indigenous girls to stop their killer. Lopez represents the perfect storm of systematic failure, where poverty, racism, and bureaucratic indifference combine to enable mass murder with minimal consequences. Today, he remains the deadliest serial killer in modern history, having served less prison time than many serve for nonviolent drug offenses. His case proves that serial killers don't need sophistication or brilliance, just vulnerable victims and systems that consider those victims expendable. Every missing girl report from South American markets could be Lopez's next victim, but no one investigates because no one who matters cares. The 300 families who lost daughters to Lopez received no compensation, no apology, and no promise that their other children are any safer today. Many believe Lopez continues killing because stopping would require admitting he's alive, free, and murdering again under government's negligent watch. Until Lopez dies naturally or kills someone authorities consider important, he'll remain free, protected by the same institutional racism that enabled his original spree. Today, tomorrow, and every day forward, the world's most prolific child killer walks free because 300 indigenous girls' lives weren't worth proper justice.